This spooky story is about a couple, Adam and June, who live in an old house on the grounds of an abandoned farm. The place is surrounded by a grim legend about two teenagers who drowned in the pond next to the house. Rumor has it that if you drive a car to the edge of the pond at night, shine your headlights on the water, and honk 3 times, you can see the ghosts of the drowned teenagers. That infernal sound wakes me once again. At first I can't place it as I ascend from the murky depths of sleep. Then I hear it again as the fog is clearing, the familiar honking of a car horn. Not again, I murmur and turn over to face my wife, June, who is also stirring awake. "What is it, Adam?" she whispers to me in a dry, hoarse voice. "More pesky kids, I'm sure." I slip out from under the covers and proceed to the window facing the pond. I step behind the lace curtain and separate the blinds at eye level. There is a car about 50 yards away, turning around on the dirt road on the other side of the pond. Within seconds its taillights fade away in a dust cloud and finally disappear altogether behind the trees that line the front of our property. I drop the blinds and curtain and make my way over to the nightstand next to my side of the bed to pick up my wristwatch. At the press of a button, its face glows, telling me it's 2:37 a.m. I lie back down on my side of the bed, the spot still warm. All of this nonsense because of some stupid urban legend, I say in a frustrated and resigned tone. I feel June's hand rub my shoulder in that consoling way that I love so much about her. She always manages to keep me calm in times like this. I continue to mull over the events in my head until I finally find sleep again. In 1983, there was an incident that took place on our property. We didn't live here at the time, and when we first moved in, we had no idea how much things would escalate regarding the infamy of this land. You see, we live in the old farmhouse out on Route 41. Yes, that farmhouse. Back when this was a thriving farm, it was owned by the Carlisle family. They had moderate success with it for many years, but began to experience a gradual decline in the late 70s. The farm soon began operating in the red, and the 1983 incident was the final nail in the coffin, so to speak. On that fateful night in August of 1983, a pair of teenage lovers found their way onto the farmland, to the pond, to be exact. They were there for a bit of harmless fun, no doubt. Maybe a bit of drinking, maybe a bit of smoking, maybe a bit of making out or skinny dipping. Whatever it was, it didn't end well. Both of them somehow ended up drowning in the pond. Their bodies were recovered, but the investigation never determined why they had drowned. Many rumors began to form as to how they died. These encompassed everything from a supernatural entity in the pond that would pull swimmers under the water, to a mysterious whirlpool that would suck people down, to aliens that had crash-landed on the farm and were drowning people. If one could dream it up, it became a theory, and the weirder the better. This is where the urban legend comes in. I don't know how or when it started, or by whom, but supposedly if you drive to the end of the dirt road on our property at night, right up to the edge of the pond with your headlights shining out over the water, and honk your horn 3 times, you will see an apparition of the 2 teens that drowned floating above the water, almost as if they were walking on top of the water. Over the years it has become a popular activity born out of dares, hazing traditions and just plain boredom to attempt this nonsensical ritual in the hopes of catching a glimpse at the dead lovers over the water. Much to my and June's dismay, I spend the morning standing out on the dock that overlooks the pond, hot coffee in hand. My breath is visible in front of me in the brisk air of late autumn. The trees on the other side of the pond look beautiful this time of year, especially when accented by the fog lingering above the water's surface. The flaming leaves of orange, red and yellow appear to rise up from the dense, opaque air. I hear footsteps as June joins me on the dock with her coffee. "Nice, isn't it?" she asks. "Yes. I've always loved it here. So peaceful. It would be perfect if not for the tourists." I make a quotation mark gesture with the fingers of my free hand when I say that last word. We both sip our coffees. Then I add, I think I'm going to go ahead with what we talked about, fencing the property and putting up a gate across the drive. "Oh, Adam, we've talked about this before. You know you're not in any kind of shape anymore to be doing that kind of work." "Then I'll pay someone else to do it," I rebut. My reply is sharper than I had intended. After a brief pause I continue, "I'm sorry, hon, I didn't mean to snap at you. I'm just so tired of all the honking and tired of catching people on our land. It's just a matter of time until either someone gets hurt or someone tries to hurt us. Now why would they do that? Her tone is as calm as ever. She's my rock. You know how people are. They visit the pond, and when nothing supernatural happens, they may turn their attention toward our house, try to break in or something. June gives me a frowning smirk. Well, it's not out of the realm of possibility, you know, I counter, especially if they're high. June takes my free arm in hers. People that really want to get in will still find a way in, she says. I know, but I think it would cut way down on the number of people that try. If that's what you want, I'll support you. She kisses me on the cheek and turns to walk back to the house. Don't stay out too long, she calls back over her shoulder. It's cold out this morning. I stand there for a few more minutes, soaking in the peace and beauty, and dreading what may come with nightfall. This time we hear the commotion before we are even in bed for the night. In fact, we are sitting in rocking chairs on the front porch when we see the headlights approaching on the opposite side of the pond. It's not completely dark yet, but the dusk indigo sky is quickly heading there. Tires make a crunching sound on the gravel and dirt as the car slowly pulls up to the edge of the lake and stops. At the angle our house sits relative to the pond, the car's headlights are not directly on us, and I surmise that the driver cannot see us. We remain still in our chairs and wait. We know what's coming. That one's pretty close to the edge, I say. Before June can answer, the driver sounds the car's horn for the first time. Right on the edge, she confirms when the horn blast ends. A second honk rings out, echoing off the rolling hills of the farmland behind our house. I stand and walk to the edge of the porch. I'm annoyed and my nerves have had enough of this. I take a few steps down onto the front lawn. Don't do anything stupid, June calls to me. I wave her off and continue walking. The horn sounds a third time. By now I am walking down the dock directly across from the car. Surely they can see me in the headlight beams. The driver, apparently in a panic, throws the car into reverse and nails the throttle. The rear tires spin, flinging chunks of dirt and gravel forward. I hear the particles clinking as they hit the sides of the car. With the loss of traction, the car begins to slip forward. First the lower front valence of the body touches the water, then the motionless front tires. In an instant the headlights are nearly submerged. The driver lets up off the accelerator before sinking any further. The car sits idle for a few seconds. I stand at the end of the dock and watch, frustrated as ever. The last thing I want is to have to go and rescue some of the punks that have been terrorizing us. Just as I'm putting a plan together in my head for how to go about helping them, the driver seems to have a moment of clarity. The throttle is applied gently, just enough to not break traction. Inch by inch the car moves backward, and in a miraculous turn of events, manages to work its way out of the impending watery doom. Once free, the driver executes a hasty turnaround and blasts down the path away from our property, fishtailing the entire way. Only a dust cloud remains on that side of the pond. That was a close one, June says excitedly. She is standing at the edge of the porch. I walk back toward her. I'm telling you, June, I've had it. I just want some peace and quiet back here. Is that too much to ask? We can always move, she offers. But we shouldn't have to. I like it here, minus the legend. I point a thumb over my shoulder toward the pond. She sighs and takes my hand when I reach the porch. I keep walking and she quickly follows behind, still hand in hand. The springs on the old metal screen door squeak as I open it. We enter the foyer and I release June's hand. I guess I'll call the fence people tomorrow, I say as the door clacks shut. I close and deadbolt the thick wooden door behind it. 3 nights later. Ronnie is driving back to Carlisle Pond with his girlfriend Christy. Dense trees of all gnarled shapes and sizes that line the sides of Route 41 come into view in their headlights and vanish just as quickly, each individual tree seeming to relish its brief moment in the spotlight. Christy is visibly nervous, but Ronnie is determined to show her. Can't we just turn around and go back? Christy pleads. We're almost to the turnoff. It's somewhere up here on the left, just past a huge rock, Ronnie says, ignoring her request. Christy sees the rock come into view and feels a tinge of dread rush through her abdomen. There is all manner of graffiti painted on the rock, no doubt a marker to alert curious seekers to the exact location. Ronnie slows the car and turns onto the dirt and gravel road. Grass is growing tall in the center of the path, in between where the car's tires grind on the small rocks. Dust kicks up behind them as Ronnie slowly drives the car around a sweeping right turn. Trees cling so tightly on both sides that branches hit the windshield and scrape along the doors. The car exits into a clearing and the pond comes into view. "This place gives me the creeps," Christy whispers, "and you came here alone the other night?" "Yeah, isn't it cool?" Ronnie stops the car several feet shy of the pond's edge, his headlights revealing the escape ruts he left last time. He points into the distance out the left side of the windshield. "Look at that old house. Gross, it looks all run down. Like nobody's lived there in decades," she responds. "But I swear I saw someone the other night. After I honked 3 times, he appeared. Just like the legend. That's what I've been trying to tell you." Christy is glad it's dark in the car so that Ronnie cannot see her rolling her eyes. It seems that this is all that he can talk about lately. He spent nearly all of his free time recently on the internet researching the history behind this urban myth. The product of his effort is now stashed in the form of printouts all over the car, a news article in the glove box, a first-hand exploration account from a message board in the console, and Christy believes she may be sitting on a Google Maps screenshot with a red circle drawn around the Route 41 turnoff. "Are you ready?" Ronnie asks. Christy sighs in frustration and says, "Just get it over with so we can go." Ronnie sounds the horn the first time. Inside the house, I look away from the book I'm reading when I hear the horn blast. June folds down the corner of her newspaper and glances at me from across the room. We share a look that says, "Here we go again." I get up from my comfy armchair and head to the foyer. I unbolt the locks and open the heavy wooden door. Through the screen of the metal door I see headlights across the pond. I open the door and storm out onto the porch as June chases after me. A second horn blast rings out. "Did you see that?" Ronnie asks excitedly. "I see movement over there." He points between the house and dock. Christy gasps. "Is someone really living here?" she wonders. But the article said that no one's lived here since the Carlisle farm shut down. Ronnie sounds the horn a 3rd time. "I'm telling you, Christy, no one does live here. I mean, look at the condition of the house." The movement in the shadows increases and soon, fully illuminated in the car's headlights, are 2 figures, a male and a female. "It's them. It's Adam and June," Ronnie cries out. Christy recalls the names from the article about the young drowned couple. The figures approach the end of the dock and, in a move that defies all physics, continue their sprint across the top of the water. Christy screams. Ronnie drops the gear selector into reverse and mashes the pedal. The tires spin again, but this time his caution in not parking too close to the edge pays off and he gains enough grip for the car to move backward. He makes a panicked turnaround, during which Christy looks fearfully out the side window. The apparitions of Adam and June are way too close now. "Go," she shrieks. Ronnie throttles the car forward down the dusty road, taillights disappearing behind the trees. "I just want to be left alone," I say to June, "to rest in peace." We still float above the water. "Shoo." She rubs my back and shoulders in her ever-comforting way. "They're just curious kids, Adam, and they can't hurt us," she reassures me. "Let's go back inside." As we turn to head back toward the dark, dilapidated house I say, "I love you, June." She replies, "I love you too, Adam. Always will." This is a spooky story about a man who sets off on a journey to visit his family for Christmas. During a snowstorm, he gets into an accident but finds an abandoned cottage to take shelter in for the night. In this cottage, he discovers a painting of a family with cut-out faces. Later that night, he suddenly hears rustling behind the door and sees a horrifying creature with a skeletal body and a disfigured face without distinct features. What happens next? Will the man manage to escape from the monster? What secrets does the old abandoned cottage hide? Who is this man, really? Listen to the story and find out. Everyone has tales about the strange and bizarre. My story is about how my half-whole mask saved my life, and continues to save my life to this very day. Late in December, I was traveling north from California to my home state of Oregon. Nothing fancy, I was just going to visit the family for the holidays. On my way north I hit a small snowstorm, nothing awful, just a lot of snow falling all at once. I wasn't worried about the small increase of snow at first, considering I had snow tires installed before I started my long journey home. I did, however, get a little hesitant to drive when the snow started to really come down. The large amount of falling snow coupled with the large amount already littering the ground as I traveled higher into the mountains caused me to consider finding a place to stay for the night. I figured I could get some sleep while the storm passes over, that and the fact that I could give my car's heater a break before it would decide to burst into flames or worse, just stop working altogether. I scanned as much of the landscape as I could, but there were no buildings in the immediate area. The only other option that I had for my predicament was to keep driving and hope there was a town or exit nearby that I could take in order to escape from the storm. I must have been driving for at least an hour before I saw a sign up ahead indicating how far the closest city was. My heart sank a little when I read 162 miles as it flew by my windshield and vanished into the snowy night. At this point the snow was beating against my windshield, and I knew that I wasn't going to last 162 minutes, let alone 162 miles. The digital clock on my radio read 1:21 a.m., and I decided that the next turnoff I saw I would take and hope that I could find a neighborhood that will produce some results on my current endeavor. My thought process was either freeze to death in my car, or stay the night at some random person's house. Weighing the two options in my head, I picked the only thing a sane person would pick and go with the house. Another 30 minutes flew by, and still no luck finding a place to pull off. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I saw a turnoff in the distance. A small shape started to make its way closer into my headlights, and on further inspection it was revealed to me that they were two wooden poles that possibly belonged to a fence. When I turned onto the road between the two wooden poles, the ground beneath me felt rocky and rough, like I was traveling on gravel. I didn't drive for too long before I started to see a small cabin creep into my field of view. The lights in the cabin were off, but the place seemed to be in good shape. I parked my car under a tall, wild-looking tree that took residence on the cabin's front lawn. Getting out of my car, I immediately grabbed my extra jacket and put it on, pulling the half-hole mask I wore around my neck up and over my ears to keep the heat around my face. I put my cap on and trudged up to the cabin after putting my cap snug on my head. As I traveled through the cold, windy night up to what I felt was my salvation, I immediately regretted not getting any gloves for my hands. Despite the irritation I had with my hands, my face and the rest of my body were comfortably warm, so I didn't have much room to complain. I stuffed my frozen hands deep into my pockets and continued my journey across the cabin's lawn. As I made my way to the door, I noticed something odd. There was no indication of life anywhere. There wasn't even a car in the front yard. Taking my right hand out of my pocket, I knocked 3 times, waiting patiently before saying, "Hello? Is anyone in there? I'm sorry to bother you so late at night, but I need a place to stay for a few hours." Nothing answered my plea for help, so I knocked 3 more times on the door, hitting my knuckles harder against the aged wood of the entrance. "Hello?" I said again a little louder before continuing with, "I'm not here to rob you or anything. I just need a place to stay for the rest of the night. I promise I'll be gone by sunrise." As I finished my sentence, I touched the ornate metal door handle. Noticing that the door seemed to be unlocked, I said in a loud voice, "I'm coming in now. If there's anybody in there, let me know now, please." I pressed the metal lever down, finding it a bit odd that the door was unlocked, and opened the door with little resistance on the other end, closing it behind me with about the same resistance despite the fact the door looked really old. Looking around the area, I noticed the cabin had 5 rooms: the living room, which was the biggest room, a small kitchen, an even smaller washroom, and what I assumed were 2 small bedrooms in the back. No lights were on inside the cozy cabin, making it almost pitch dark if my eyes weren't already adjusted to the darkness from outside. I decided the best thing to do would be to search for a light switch, so I took out my phone and turned on my flashlight app to scan the walls. My scan produced no results, however, and at the risk of losing precious battery power on my phone, I decided the best option would be to turn off the light and put my phone on airplane mode. Before turning off my light, I studied the paintings hanging on the wall that I glossed over in the initial scan. Each painting that crossed my sights was just typical landscapes or harbors, things like that. There was a painting that looked like a fox hunt or something like that, but other than that it was just typical paintings you would see hanging on the walls around an elderly person's home. There was a painting, however, that caught my attention. The painting was small and consisted of what looked like 2 adults, a mother and father, a teenage girl, and a small child. The family captured in that painting were wearing what looked like Victorian-era clothing. I'm only guessing about the clothes. I mean, they could have been from the 1800s or the early 20th century. The point is that the clothing was very ornate and regal. There was something really disturbing about the image in the painting, though. The faces of each member of the family looked like they were smoothed over with clay. It's kind of hard to describe it, but the 3 family members looked like they had no facial features. By no facial features, I mean instead of the normal facial features you and I have, the 3 people in the painting had grooves of smooth flesh where normally you have an eye, nose, or mouth. The only person in the painting that didn't possess a blank face was the teenage girl, which had normal facial features for a teenage girl. In fact, she was quite breathtaking. I pulled myself away from the painting to take a glance at my phone for the time. My phone indicated that it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, so I decided to go to the back room and check to see if it was occupied. To my relief, the room was vacant. Besides a medium-sized bed, ornate dresser, and nightstand, there wasn't much to go by. The walls were blank besides more sappy paintings to give it a little more atmosphere. Although there was no indication of a heating system besides a chimney, the rooms were bearable enough that I figured I could just bundle up in my clothes under the covers in order to stay warm. I was only going to be there for a few hours anyway, so there wasn't much point in starting a fire. Plus, the people who owned the cabin wouldn't be back tonight considering how late it was. I hopped into the worn-out bed facing the open door next to another door I assumed was a closet and pulled my half-whole mask completely up and over my face to make sure my head would stay nice and warm the rest of my stay. Pulling the fabric of my mask down slightly, I set the alarm on my phone for 4:30 a.m. and put it back down onto the nightstand. I covered my face again and bundled up tightly with the sheets, closing my eyes and letting dreamland take me away until I woke up after what felt like minutes later to the sound of scratching. My body froze as I heard the noise over and over again, softly coming from the closed door. I tried to relax myself by thinking that all the noise that I heard was just a rat or some other animal that was spending the night in the closet while the cabin's owners were away. Quietly, I shifted onto my back, pulling my half-whole mask down slightly so a little slit appeared, giving me a small window to look at what was out there. I laid on the bed stiff as a board with my cap and mask covering my face in such a way that it acted like a visor, giving me a small peek at what was in the darkness. Thankfully, my eyes were still adjusted to the dark, which gave me a small amount of reassurance as I continued looking in the direction the scratching noise was coming from. The scratching continued louder and longer for what seemed like minutes until just like that, it suddenly stopped. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't a safe kind of silence. The deafening silence in the room was a foreboding, ominous sort of silence. The vacuum of sound in the air was the type of silence that happens in a movie just before something jumps out at you. Just when I began to calm myself down, the doorknob to closet began to jiggle and turn very slowly. My heart was racing out of my chest as I saw and heard that knob turn, and every inch of my body wanted to bolt out of that bed and out of that cabin before whatever was on the other side of that door got out after me. I laid perfectly still on the bed despite the fact that I had a cocktail of adrenaline, nerves, and instincts telling me to get the hell out of there. My eyes widened as the door to the closet opened slightly and I saw what looked like a dried head attached to an elongated neck pop out of the opening, followed by a skeletal body. The thing that was emerging from the closet crawled on all fours out of the doorway and slowly made its way to the bed I was sleeping in. I had never been more frightened in my whole entire life as the thing stood up, almost touching the roof of the cabin, and looked down in my direction. The creature stood there studying me as I peeked through the thin slit in my mask, pure terror swirling around in my mind as I glanced up at the body of the creature. Looking at the creature's skeletal face, I noticed that it had no eyes in its eye sockets, which led me to believe that it couldn't see me even though I could see it. Just when the idea of it not being able to see me started to give me a little comfort, the creature began to speak. Strange, the creature whispered softly as it continued to watch me, and then began to speak again. It has no fear of me, the creature continued to say in a hoarse tone as it began to breathe loudly, continuing to look at me and gripping down on the edge of my bed. Feeling the creature's bony hand touch the edge of my bed caused my brain to go into complete panic mode. The only thing that stopped me from jumping up was the thought that maybe the creature believed I was dead or asleep and wouldn't attack. How can it not fear? How can it not fear me? The thing said through clenched teeth before loudly gasping and suddenly pulling back with its mouth open in an expression that seemed like fear. It has no face. The thing whispered to itself as it continued to back away. It has no face. The creature said again, but this time louder than before and slightly more threatening. It has no face. The creature shouted as it backed off further away from the bed. I heard the thing breathing loudly and quickly before calming down and slowly returning to the side of the bed. Leaning over me slowly, the creature continued to look at me before softly beginning to breathe on my face. I could smell its foul breath even through my mask. The smell was so powerful that it took all my strength not gag as a reflex to the awful stench. In my mind, I made the choice to keep motionless and not do or say anything that could compromise whatever illusion I was giving the thing that was currently studying me. The creature breathed on me again softly. The stench I smelled from its breath could only be described as pure death, which only strengthened my resolve to stay perfectly motionless. Strange, the thing whispered at me again, leaning in close to me to the point where I could see and smell its decaying flesh. The creature slowly reached for me, its hand slowly moving towards my face. With every inch that decaying hand moved, I couldn't help but feel my situation becoming more and more dire. I thought that this was it for me. The creature would kill me tonight, or take me away and torture me, then kill me, and no one would know what happened to me. No one would find my body out here, and no one would know my story. I could feel tears start to swell up in my eyes as I thought of everyone I ever loved being yanked away from me in this one moment. No face, no face, no face. The creature softly chanted as its hands crept ever closer to my face. I could hear the anguish in the creature's voice as it continued chanting over and over as it reached for me. As the creature's long bony hand crept only centimeters away from my face, I braced myself for the worst, making the last thoughts I would ever have about the people who I loved. Just as I thought my life was all over, a sudden loud noise erupted from the room, filling the ear closest to the nightstand with a flood of beeps, and causing the creature to scream and jump back. As the noise continued, the creature threw itself back against the wall, shrieking uncontrollably in terror as it stumbled back towards the closet. I was dumbstruck for a second before the thought came to me that I had set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., which must have been the source of the noise. I jumped out of the bed, grabbing my phone and pointing the lit-up screen at the monster as the alarm continued to ring loudly. The loud ringing caused the monster to shriek even more in confusion and terror as it retreated quicker as I approached. Seeing my chance, I activated my phone's flashlight and put it on strobe in order to disorientate the monster further. No face. No face. No face. The creature shrieked at me as it withdrew to the safety of the closet. I continued to shine my light on the creature, and for added effect, I started playing loud music as I continued to jab my phone in the monster's direction like a lion tamer. The thing threw itself into the dark recesses of the closet, and I shoved the door back, locking it after I slammed it closed. The shrieks coming from the monster started to get fainter and fainter, like it was retreating deeper into the house. No face. No face. It has no face. I could hear the creature yell out as it got further and further away. After hearing the last retreating words of the thing that terrified me the whole night, I bolted from the cabin at breakneck speed, jumping into my car, and floored it off the gravel road. I was shaking all over as I drove, and when I pulled my half-whole mask further down, my exposed skin was as white as the snow that littered the ground. I was so frightened by the whole experience. As soon as I pulled into the first town I saw, I parked my car and began to sob uncontrollably for a while. The experience that I had just been through would scar me for life, but as I wept in my car in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, I couldn't help but start to laugh a little in between my fits of crying. I got through my ordeal without so much as a scratch on me. Well, besides the mental scars, I was fine, I was alive, and I didn't have to worry anymore. After I finished with my whole episode of crying and laughing like an insane person, I entered the store sniffling and wiping away the rest of my tears. As I continued into the store, the cashier looked up at me and traced my direction with his eyes before continuing with what he was doing. The store was mostly empty. Besides an elderly couple, I was the only customer in there. Had a rough night? The cashier said with one eyebrow cocked up while he scanned my items. You have no idea, I said, looking out the window at the sunny winter day. I noticed you looked a bit upset when you came in. What happened? Did you get dumped or something? He said, looking up at me as the register computed how much I owed him. Looking at the young man behind the register, he seemed to be a little younger than I was, although that doesn't say much because even though I'm 22, I look younger than my actual age. I looked at the cashier's name tag for a second before feeling that I had nothing to lose by telling him about the night I just had. The small name on his ID tag read Evan, and as I finished telling him my frightening tale, something odd happened. I expected him to burst out laughing or say I was the best liar he had ever talked to. Instead of doing any of that, Evan just stood there, his skin milk white as he stared at me with an expression so horrified he gave me the impression that he just witnessed someone get run over by a train or something. "Evan, are you alright?" I said, looking into his eyes while we both stood there quiet. "What?" "Oh. Yeah. It's just," Evan began to say before his thoughts trailed off due to the new feeling that we were both being watched. I began to feel eyes burn into the back of my head before turning around to see the old couple I glanced at when I entered the store beforehand. The old couple possessed the same horrified look that Evan had just a few seconds ago. They must have heard the whole story I told. After a few moments of silence, the old couple asked me what I knew about the cabin, to which I couldn't really say. I gave them the best description I could about what I saw. The couple proceeded to tell me about the cabin, how long it's been there, and that it was haunted by a presence so terrifying that the place was condemned and left to rot away after so many people disappeared there. They told me that no one who ever stayed in that cabin has ever been seen alive again, if they've ever been seen at all after their visit. One of my best friends stayed the night in that cabin, Evan said quietly as he stared off into the distance, but continued his thoughts with, "I refused to go into the cabin. I knew something bad would happen if we went." I tried so hard to convince him that the dare was stupid and to not go in, but he refused to be labeled as a chicken and continued with the dare. Evan's eyes began to water as he continued with his story. "I never saw him again after that night. I kept calling his house, but his parents still couldn't find him. We put out flyers and billboards, but we never had any luck. After a few days, we contacted the police, and I told them about the cabin." Evan began to choke down tears as he clenched his fist. "They found him in the basement of that cabin, sprawled out on the floor. His eyes were surgically removed from his eye sockets, his nose was removed, and his lips, they were sliced off. When they found him, he was naked with an incision from the bottom of his rib cage to his pelvis down the middle of his body. All of the internal organs were extracted from his body, and to add insult to injury, his genitals were sliced clean off. But you want to know the worst part of it all? When the police did an autopsy on the body, they found that he was alive during the whole process." Evan winced as he remembered the whole gruesome sight and said, "They never found who or what did it. There was no DNA evidence to convict anybody, they didn't find the tools that made the incisions, and they didn't find anything." Evan clenched his fist tighter on the table before the old man, listening to our conversation, put his hand on Evan's shoulder to reassure him that it was going to be all right. As he comforted Evan, he looked at me and said, "People have been disappearing from that area for decades, maybe even centuries for all we know, but the bodies always end the same gruesome way. I don't care who you are, no one deserves something like that happening to them. They should just torch that evil place to the ground." The old lady joined her husband's side and looked at me with the most foreboding face I had ever seen. "If your story is true, you should consider yourself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. In all my years of living, you are the only one to go into that cabin and come out alive," the woman said, gripping onto her husband's hand tightly as she spoke to me. After hearing the old woman's words, I realized that Evan said the body of his friend was found in the basement, which explains why the monster's voice got fainter. It would have pulled me into the basement if my phone hadn't gone off. I quickly paid for my items and left the store, more troubled now than I was when I entered. Feeling drowsy due to the lack of sleep and constant adrenaline rush caused by my whole terrible ordeal, I decided to go to a hotel and spend the day sleeping and relaxing to get my mind off things. That night, I sat on the bed in my hotel room and looked at the two items that saved my life. In one hand, I gripped onto my half-whole mask, which hid my face from that terrible monster. In my other hand, I held my cell phone, which scared away the horrible beast that could have killed me. I decided that from that day on, I would always wear my half-whole mask to bed. It saved my life. That's the least I can do for it. The recent brush with death I just experienced had taught me that life is too precious to waste, so I decided to ask my best friend Samantha out on a date, and things worked perfectly. Samantha and I were together for 2 years before I recently asked for her hand in marriage, which she said yes. Part of me will never forget that awful night, and because of it, not only have I been wearing my half-whole mask to bed every night since then, but I've also made it a priority not to live in any type of house that has a basement. As an added safety measure, I started locking every door before going to bed. It's a pain, but you can never be too careful. Despite these crazy precautions, Samantha has accepted my little quirks and has continued to be supportive as we continue our journey through life together. I couldn't be happier with the way things turned out in my life, and I'm so lucky to be with Samantha. Everything's perfect. There's just one thing that bothers me, and I think I might just have to blame my imagination, but sometimes, when I wake up at night, when it's really quiet, sometimes, I'll hear soft scratching noises. Also, and I think it's just paranoia, but I swear, sometimes I hear something whisper, "No face," from inside my closet. This story is about a family that moves into an old farmhouse. The daughter, Kip, befriends a creature she calls Mr. Leaves. Is this spirit kind or evil? What will happen to the girl and her family? Listen and find out. Mr. Leaves was here. Those were the first words out of my daughter's mouth that morning. I dismissed the chatter as normal for a 7-year-old girl. It didn't seem strange to me that she would develop a new imaginary friend, especially under the circumstances. Change can do that to a kid, forcing them to create something to hold on to, making the world seem more secure. We had decided to move away from the city, to find somewhere a little less hectic, somewhere we could call home. As a doctor, I had to wait until an opportunity arose and was delighted when an opening appeared in the sleepy town of Windarm. It was a quiet place filled with pristine cottages, sun-baked streets, and lush hedgerows, not too big, not too small, perfect for the 3 of us. My wife, Erin, and I had named our daughter Karen, after an aunt, but we always called her Kip instead. It was an old English word my grandfather used when he was going to sleep. Karen loved to sleep more than most, and so Kip seemed to suit her just fine. Our new home on the outskirts of Windarm town was older than we were used to, a converted farmhouse dating back 150 years or so. With a little bit of land thrown into the deal for good measure, we fell in love with the place immediately. When we first pulled up outside, Kip rushed up the rickety white stairs, through the wide double doors and disappeared into the embrace of her new home. She was ecstatic, roaming around the confines of the spaces inside. It was an adventure for her. Even at such a fragile age, she understood the importance of the stories old places could tell. She didn't mind the dust, the shaky banisters, or the creaking floorboards. Within 10 minutes, each of the 3 floors had been explored by her little 7-year-old feet. Of course, there were sure to be nooks and crannies not yet seen in the attic and cellar, but Kip was not interested in those places for now. She was only interested in where she could sleep and play. I had naively told her she could choose any of the bedrooms as her own, and of course she did, the best one in the house. Erin and I smiled at each other, watching happily as Kip darted around her new room excitedly. She loved the high ceiling because it felt grand and imposing, like being a princess in a castle. She found the groans and squeaks that the floorboards made under her feet hilarious, pressing up and down on the loudest ones while giggling. Most of all, she loved the window. It was wide and sprawling, looking out to the farmland which bobbed and weaved over flats and small hills below. An old oak tree towered alongside a vacant barn nearby, and the summer sky bleached the world in blues, whites, and yellows, and yet, it was something much closer which fascinated my daughter. A thick web of ivy roots had thrust out of the soil decades earlier, climbing a carefully constructed wooden frame attached to the house, which rose as high as the roof. The ivy had clawed and fingered its way across the wooden slats of the farmhouse, almost entirely covering that side of the building. The surrounding land was in full bloom, everything vibrant and green. The fields were swathed in tall crops which poked out of the soil like a million city dwellers standing still in the sun. Everything was alive and vivid, that was, except for the climbing ivy. Its vines were spindly, yet clung to the wooden frame of the house with deceptive strength. A vast sea of leaves, brown and withered, reached up across the wooden wall, encircling Kip's window. There was something troubling about those vines, clashing against, almost strangling the possibilities of summer. Kip didn't mind, in fact she was enamored by them, having me open the window so she could caress the golden leaves which touched the sill. The first night in the house was like any spent in a new place, unfamiliar creaks and sounds echoing out through the darkness. I am often a deep sleeper, but the uncertainty of the old building left me checking every bump and movement I heard throughout the night. I switched the lights on, checked the doors, and then looked in on Kip. She slept soundly, but I noticed that the window was still open, letting in the night's cool breeze. I tried to shut it, but it felt jammed or stuck, the old flaking paint and grime freezing it into position after years of little use. I told myself I'd fix it in the morning. After all, Kip was 2 floors up and we were a quarter of an hour by car from any other house. I felt she'd be quite safe with the window open. Kip loved to lie in, and as it was Saturday, and our first full day at our new home, I let her sleep until 10 in the morning. When I entered her room with a bowl of cereal and glass of orange juice, I noticed how cold that big old room could get even in the summer. She lay on her bed still asleep. I gently woke her, and it was then that she spoke those bewildering words, "Mr. Leaves was here." I found the phrase amusing at first, but she seemed frightened, so we talked about it. "He scares me, Daddy," she offered, but didn't want to say any more. I comforted her, saying that it was probably just a bad dream and that moving to a new place could be pretty scary by itself, but she still seemed uneasy. It was obvious to me that she was speaking about an imaginary friend, but the conversation disturbed me enough that I talked it over with my wife, worried that our daughter might not be adjusting well to the move. It's hard to leave your friends and school behind. That day, more of our things from the old home arrived. Slowly the house began to feel like ours, and I enjoyed wandering around it, taking in the glorious view of the crops fields. In the late afternoon, I went up to Kip's room with my toolbox, determined to close the window to stop her from catching a summer cold. As I chipped away at the dirt and flaked paint which had jammed the window open, I looked down and could see that Kip was playing away from the house, sitting on an old rope swing which hung from the oak tree by the barn. She looked happy. Finally the window budged and I was able to close it. On the second night, I didn't sleep well at all, and by the morning I felt shattered. Something had changed to me. The house didn't feel as comfortable as it did when we first arrived. The air had become closer and stifled. Again, I let Kip sleep in for a while before bringing her breakfast. She was already awake when I entered, and when I asked her how she had slept, she replied, "Not good, Daddy." When I inquired why, she whispered Mr. Leaves was watching me from outside. I looked over at the window for a moment, a chill running up my back. "Can you tell him to go away?" Kip asked. Again, I reassured her and gave her a big hug. Soon, she was playing on the swing again by the barn. For most of that day, I tried to put my files in order. I wasn't due at the doctor's office in town for another 2 weeks, but I wanted to be as prepared as possible. Erin took care of some business at the bank, while Kip continued to smile and giggle as she always did, running around the house playing games. Most kids get bored during the summer holidays, but she always had a way of engaging with the world which meant she never had a dull moment. I remember it being just after 2 in the morning. It was dark, but something had pulled me from a heavy sleep. Uncertain at first as I opened my eyes to the darkness, I finally realized what it was. Kip was talking. I didn't want to disturb Erin, and I knew it was probably just my daughter talking in her sleep as she had done in the past, but as I walked barefoot across the creaking floor towards her room, I kept thinking about those words, "Mr. Leaves was watching me." As quietly as possible, I reached the door and could still hear her talking loudly, her words muffled slightly. I knocked and entered. The window was once again open and Kip was leaning out of it chatting away. On asking her what she was doing, she turned slowly towards me and said, "I'm talking to Mr. Leaves." I rushed over to the window and saw nothing but the cool summer night and the climbing ivy fluttering slightly at the presence of a sudden breeze. "He keeps looking at me, Daddy," said Kip, as I put her back into bed. I closed the window and slept in an armchair next to her until morning. The following day, the sun absolutely split the sky. It was perfect weather, and I decided that it would be good to get Kip to help me with some chores, hoping that keeping her active would help her sleep more soundly at night. In the morning, we cut and raked the front and back lawns. We then dug out some weeds around a flower bed. Kip and Erin found it hysterical when they soaked me with a hose while watering the plants. Finally, I decided that Kip and I should take a look at the old barn. It had been included in the sale of the house, but hadn't been used for years. I had only been in it once, when viewing the property months previous, and that was just a quick peek without going inside. It was the house I was really interested in. Kip had been helping her mom wash the car when I took her hand and said, "Fair maiden, are you ready for an adventure?" "Yes," she replied with delight. Erin smiled approvingly. There be dragons nearby, and only the sword skills of the legendary Lady Kip can defeat them. "Okay, let's go," I yelled. I grabbed her hand and led her round to the side of the house where her window looked out, high above. Picking her up and putting her on my shoulders, she laughed loudly. "Go, Daddy, go." I ran forwards towards the old barn, but as we passed the oak tree on the way, she suddenly stopped laughing. At first she asked quietly, "Where are we going?" Another few footsteps, and it wasn't long before she burst into tears, shouting and pleading for us to go back to the house. I stopped immediately, shocked by her response, and gave her a big hug as my wife came running. "What's wrong, honey?" asked Erin. Through tears and a shaking voice, Kip replied, "Daddy was taking me to the barn." "And why did that upset you?" "Mr. Leaves. Mr. Leaves." At that she continued to sob and cry. Erin comforted her as I marched inside. I was going to put a stop to this nonsense. Grabbing my toolbox, I ran up the stairs and into Kip's room. In a few minutes the job was done and the window had been nailed shut. There'd be no more talking to Mr. Leaves. After making Kip her favorite supper, and letting her stay up a little later than usual to watch a film with us, we both tucked her into her bed back upstairs. She didn't seem upset, and when we brought up the idea of her moving rooms, she swore to us that everything was fine. She really did love that room. Erin read her a story, we kissed her goodnight, and then we went to bed. I woke to the sound of screaming. No one can underestimate the power of a child's cry for help on a parent. I leapt out of bed and tore across the hallway in the dark, bursting into Kip's room. She lay in the middle of the floor, sobbing in fear. My eyes had yet to adapt to the darkness, but as I instinctively stepped forward to pick my daughter up from the ground, I knew that I was not alone. A sharp pain seared across the back of my head as I fell to the floor, dazed. "Daddy!" Kip screamed as she clutched onto me for dear life. The sound of feet came once more, and as I rolled over I saw my wife, Erin, running through the doorway. I tried to warn her, but the strike to the back of my head had left me both bloodied and sluggish. As any loving mother would, Erin ran to her family's aid. A tall, darkened figure then reached out from behind the door, grabbing my wife's throat with grizzled, dirt-ridden hands, and smashing her head straight into a wall. Her body crumpled to the ground. I staggered to my feet and began swinging my arms as hard as I could at the beast, but in such a daze, the warm trickle of blood running down the back of my neck, it was easy to be outfought. I tried my best, damn it, I tried. Something smashed against my jaw, then my nose, crushing it into my face. I gasped and fell to the ground. Kip held on to me once more, screaming, crying, her world undone. There was no comfort I could give, no offer of protection. The blood from my shattered nose filled up my mouth as I lay on my back. I tried to rise once more, only to be battered again by an unseen force. Kip sobbed, and in that moment I knew I had failed her. The tall figure stooped in the darkness, grabbing Kip by her long locks of beautiful brown hair, and yanking her head backwards. She would not let go of me. Again, the figure pulled sharply, this time wrenching my daughter straight out of my arms and lifting her up by her hair. Kip screamed in agony. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a shower of shattered glass. I looked up and saw the beast which had my daughter by the hair. The creature which had set out to destroy my family, it was man. Just a man. But the thing which had burst through the window was anything but human. In the darkness, I saw them struggle. The man was powerful, no doubt, but his opponent was big and quick. It was the shape of a person, but as it moved I could hear the loud rustling of its construction. The man let out a cry. A pitiful, begging sound, pleading for mercy. He dropped Kip to the ground. Silence. Nothing but the rustling of leaves in the night. One last gasp was heard as our attacker was dragged through the open window to his death. I don't know how long I passed out for, but it was Erin who woke me. The attack had left her unconscious for a time, but she was okay. Helped to my feet, we both staggered over to where Kip was standing. She was leaning out of the window, crying. But they weren't tears of fear or physical pain, I knew that sound well. It was the cry of grief and loss. Looking down below, the still dead corpse of our attacker lay on the ground, covered by a blanket of leaves which slowly blew away into the distance. We hugged each other and consoled Kip as she stared out into the night. "Mr. Leaves," she whispered, "Mr. Leaves." When the police arrived, they quickly identified the intruder as James Greck, a man who was wanted for questioning in connection to a series of child rape accusations. He had been hiding in the old barn for a while, most probably because the house had been empty for a number of years. When he saw that a family had moved in with a young daughter, he couldn't resist the opportunity. We quickly moved from the old farmhouse to a new place across town, but even then we didn't last long. The memory of that night, being so close to where it all took place, was too much for Aaron and me, but most of all we wanted to protect our daughter. Within 6 months we had left the town of Windarn for good. Kip is now 10 years old, she's happy and continues to surprise us day by day. She says she wants to be an explorer, there's all sorts of stuff out there, waiting to be found, she says. After that night, I tend to agree with her. I often think about what happened, and what it was that we saw. What saved us? The only hint of an explanation was given to me a month before we left Windarn. I was drinking in a local bar, and started chatting to an off-duty police officer who had attended the scene the night we were attacked. "It's a shame you left the old farm. That place deserves a nice family," he said, downing his 6th beer. "How can a place deserve anything?" I asked. I suppose it's silly. I knew the previous owners. Mr. and Mrs. Dimitra, nice folks. Lived there for years, cared for the place. And what does that have to do with a family living there? Well, they loved kids, but never had any of their own. Dunno why, I don't think they could. What I do know is that everyone round here loved both of them. They always did nice things for the kids, helping out and such. I still don't understand? I pressed. They were always doing stuff for the kids of the town. Halloween, Christmas, whenever. And I just think it would have been nice if their old farmhouse went to a family with kids, that's all. They'd ave like that. It was then that I plucked up the courage, whether it was the alcohol or the timing, I don't know, to ask the question I needed answered most. The question I hadn't dared ask anyone for fear of ridicule. But by then I was leaving, so it didn't matter if people thought me mad. I just had to know. "Have you ever heard of Mr. Leaves?" I asked nervously. The man laughed. "Of course I have." I was shocked. Someone knew about that thing. He continued, "When Mrs. Dimitra passed away, the old man was heartbroken about losing his wife. He threw himself into volunteering around the town. You know the Windarn Park in the middle of town?" I nodded. That was Mr. Dimitra that did that. Used to be all overgrown and barren, but he got the community interested in chipping in. So, we all sorted it out together. The old man could move mountains. Anyway, he just worked away at fixing the park and planting trees, as well as keeping his own garden going, before he passed away a few years ago. "What does this have to?" I said before being interrupted. Really loved his gardening, did Mr. Dimitra, or as the kids called him, Old Mr. Leaves.